This is how one innocent question can turn into a 10-minute rant on League of Legends lore. What is Yorick doing now after a short story with Illaoi, from stain to blame? Researching this question was a roller coaster. On one hand, it reminded me how dreadful the Sentinels of Light event was, lore-wise, but on the other hand, it reminded me of how goated Yorick Mori is. The story he is talking about is called The Will of the Dead, which is a clever name because when Illaoi and Yorick meet, there is a lot of debate on whether or not what Yorick does to the dead and his ghouls aligns with the beliefs of Illaoi. Illaoi and her god believe that life is motion, and his soul must continue to change, but where there is no life, there can be no motion. And seeing these ghouls, Illaoi believes they are stuck in a state of undeath, unable to progress as a spirit. Yorick says these ghouls have a purpose. The dead can be redeemed, and while yes, he forces these ghouls to serve, they have a purpose in the afterlife. That is the theming of the story, but the purpose of the story itself is to bridge the gap between the Ruined King game and the Sentinels of Light event. Canonically, it happens right between those two events. The Ruined King game is about Braum, Misfortune, Illaoi, Pyke, and Yasuo defeating Viego and sealing him away in what is basically the tier of the goddess, but we just call it the amulet. The problem was the spirit itself was still active and causing problems like mentally corrupting Misfortune, so Illaoi set sail to the Shadow Isles to destroy it. She wanted to kill Viego for good. Unfortunately, they are attacked by a servant of Thresh, which is a shock because Illaoi thought she killed Thresh. Guess not. After a pretty cool fight where the goat Yorick summons ghouls from beneath the earth, the servant of Thresh escapes with the amulet. This was the true purpose of the story, to explain how exactly Illaoi lost the amulet containing Viego, and how Thresh was able to resurrect Viego before the Sentinels of Light event. Without this fumble, the Sentinels of Light canon event doesn't happen. If Illaoi did manage to throw the amulet into the volcano, then none of this Isolde nonsense happens ever again. The Will of the Dead story is actually really good. I liked it a lot. It's a great story because there's character development for the champions you know, and a really great character arc for a one-off character you'll never hear from again. There are heavy themes of failure, loyalty, and my favorite theme of all, redemption. It wasn't just the redemption of the dead, it was the redemption of Riot Games' lore department. I will get more into that later. This story being such a joy to read only made me dread this question more, because I remembered what happened next for Yorick canonically. Remember, while this story was written after the Sentinels of Light event, it is set just before the events of the global ruination. This story came to tie things together on February 28, 2023, while the Sentinels of Light event was during the summer of 21. People, me, still complain about this event to this day. Let's talk about it in terms of Yorick's involvement. The Sentinels of Light event starts with the outbreak of the global heroism, as we learn about it through the opening cinematic and the visual novel on the client. We mostly follow Senna and Lucian as they gather a force of ragtag volunteer sentinels to stop Viego from getting together the pieces of his wife scattered across the world. The sentinels ultimately fail to stop him, so they have to make it to the Shadow Isles and fight him there. Senna is convinced the only way to really stop Viego is to let him have the fragment of Isolde within her. On the island, they are met with an old sentinel who tells them that they will die if they choose to go into the mist as they are now. They should meet his old friend, Yorick the Gravedigger. What I am about to say is only slight exaggeration. The Sentinels walk up to Yorick. Yorick, being awesome, notices them and already knows why they are approaching. He knows they need a way to survive the mist. He says, "This is all that remains of the waters of life," something he has defended with literally his soul for the past 1,000 years. He also says something close to, "This freak abomination ghoul mass is the maiden of the mist. One of the pieces of Isolde you're after. Please take her." Basically, take this woman, take a drop of water, and you can actually just go ahead and leave now. There is a mention of Yorick's regret in not giving Isolde her last rites. That will come back up later. This is the only semblance of a story or character arc for Yorick, but it pales in comparison to what should have been his role in stopping Viego, shoving a shovel straight through the man who ruined his island. Fast forward through everything the Sentinels did to stop Viego, and we see Yorick off to the side. He's dragging the butt of his shovel through the dirt. He's finally performing the last rites of Isolde. This is the Yorick we know. It's the Yorick who desperately tried to save a shipwrecked man with 1,000-year-old bandages. It's the weird child that could talk to the dead and was shunned by the living. Yorick has respect for the dead. This is the amazing character that was snubbed for comic relief Rengar, who also was kinda massacred character-wise. I believe this is the most up-to-date canon moment for Yorick. He doesn't even say goodbye. No one really thanks him, and Yorick doesn't have a moment where he thinks that, yeah, I actually would have really liked to have a greater part in killing Viego and fulfilling my life's duty of a millennia. There wasn't even an easy excuse of, I have graves to attend to, which after the fact would have been made ridiculous because he left with Illaoi to throw Viego into a volcano. I don't want to bash the Sentinels of Light event too much 4 years later. It was a little bit of fun at the time, but here's a direct quote from the Illaoi Yorick story. You're right, there is nothing more I'd enjoy than killing Viego. That's what Yorick said. Everyone knew that was core to Yorick's character, so here's why I think he didn't get his moment. It's possible it has to do with the cinematics of this event. They were probably made long before the visual novel and didn't include Yorick. They also didn't include many other Sentinels of Light that were in the visual novel like Olaf, Aurelia, or Riven. But who really cares? At least Graves looked cool. You also have to remember, Riot made 4 different versions of this story. They all had the same basic plot points, but Wild Rift had one. There was also a comic called Steadfast Heart. There was a League client version, and then there was a cinematics. I think I got those right, but there's a lot of confusion. Equally likely is that Riot had no way of consistently characterizing their characters because they didn't care past making Aurelia look good in a Sentinel skin. Not to mention how ultra serious characters were reduced to comic reliefs, which can be done, but it wasn't really done well here. In one story, Yorick will be a quest-giving item NPC with 3 lines all about this freakish ghoul that he hates. And in another story, he's an insanely deep, cool, philosophical shovel-wielding gravedigger that can summon ghouls on command. If you read the story, you would know Yorick's compound has a literal army of ghouls everywhere with the stated purpose of we all kind of want to kill Viego, and nothing comes of it. The most charitable reason I can think of would be that Yorick being so cool and awesome in the Will of the Dead story was an apology or a love letter to anyone that was invested in the lore or just liked Yorick's character. Everything I've read about this event points to it being made for his hardcore lore fans, but they just missed the mark. But really, they tried, and it truly did pave a way for an awesome Noxian lore season that I really did enjoy. It read like a please forgive us letter wrapped in a narrative, and they did the same thing for Pantheon that contextualizes the fact that his character kind of was reduced to a servant in about 2 lines of dialogue, despite being the epitome of resistance and perseverance. That's a different video. So to finally come back and answer your question, what is Yorick doing now after the story with Illaoi? First, he seems to have just returned to his normal gravedigging life. Then he gives away the maiden and some water to the Sentinels of Light. Then he waits in his graveyard like a good little monk. Meanwhile, the maiden reforms into Isolde. Then Action shoots Isolde, which weakens Viego enough for him to be trapped. Someone then asks the question, why in the world is the maiden still around if Viego is trapped and Isolde is shot? The narrative then moves on immediately. The Black Mist still exists, and the best I can say for Yorick is that he's likely still digging graves. He missed out on his chance to really face Viego, and now not only is he going to dig graves for God knows how long, his nagging ghoul wife has come back to nag him, telling him to literally off himself for what could be another 5,000 years. If Yorick is your goat, I am sorry I had to relay the news of his fate to you in this way, but that's the story of Yorick beyond what he did with Illaoi, and some thoughts on the Sentinels of Light event. If you have questions, be sure to ask them in the comments. Otherwise, subscribe for more videos. Another last minute comment on Illaoi's view of the dead, and those she views as unalive, and therefore unmoving. What would she think of Blitzcrank? I think she would see or interpret in her own way that this golem does move towards heroism in his own way. Illaoi would see that there isn't a single guilty gear striving for anything malicious, that in the hearts, spirits, or cogs of these entities lies a true and genuine opportunity to flow with the tide of life. Read The Will of the Dead. It might just change your life. And thanks for the question, Stain. Good luck out there.